everyone, and welcome back to another video from the Minecraft Create mod, where today we are going to be taking a little look at these. So this is the andesite tunnel, and this is its brass counterpart, the brass tunnel. And these are really useful for being able to change how you're distributing goods which are coming in from your farms. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little look at our tunnels going down and have a bit of a chat about how these guys work. And to begin with, we're going to be focusing on the brass tunnels because they are considerably more useful than the andesite ones, and I'll get into why once we get down to the bottom of this little run here. But for now, we will just be focusing on the brass ones. Making them isn't too challenging. If you come over into JEI just over here, we can have a little look at them. So we can see that they do use an electron tube, but you do get 2 tunnels out of it once you've done that. So they're not particularly expensive. You will of course though have to have brass available to you, so they're not completely early game. But once you've got your brass tunnels, what can you actually do with them? Well, as I say, they are used for changing how you distribute items, and so they are very useful to work with farms. So this little chest that we've got over here, this is representing your average tree farm. Good old Create, we know that it is very good for making farms like this, and this is the sort of output you're going to get from it. All sorts of jumbled up items in there just because we've been growing different types of trees. And the first thing that we can do with these tunnels that makes life nice and easy for us is they have a little filter slot that you can see just in the front there. And so what we can say is, well, if this is a tree farm, then I just want to filter away all of the different pieces of wood. I'm not too fussed about everything else. So what I'll do is I'll place my oak there, my dark oak, my birch, my jungle and my acacia if that's what I'm farming, and these tunnels are going to be able to split out these items from them from everything else. And because we've left this one on the end blank, with nothing in that filter slot when we set this off, everything that is filtered will go through those and everything else is going to come through here and get saved up in this chest, which for example could be being used to bin stuff, for example. Maybe you're just going to burn away the sticks. And so now when we set this farm off, what we should find is that all of our items are just going to come out of our chest. Again, same as if it's coming out of a tree farm, but now it's all going to get carefully segregated away from each other, with all of the woods that we want to keep coming out and just going into their respective chests, and all of the junk coming into the one at the end. And this just means that those tunnels have made it very easy for us to be able to separate away different items of wood and different things away from each other. Useful when you've got farms that are bringing in a lot of different types of items. But what if you don't have a farm that's got lots of different types of items? What if it's just a cobble farm and it is chuffing out cobble like nobody's business, and you just want to be able to split it all away so you've not just got one chest constantly filling up? Perhaps you've got 4 different outputs all going to different types of farms. One that's going to make gravel, one that's going to make iron, and all you want to do is split this cobble away without having to have 4 separate cobble farms. Well, luckily, good old tunnels are able to do this as well. For this, we're not going to need to set any filter items because it's just working with cobble. Instead, we're going to be using the inputs which are on the top. And you can see what options you've got for what these tunnels can do if you hover your mouse cursor over the input slot that you can see so that it's highlighted, and then hold down your right mouse button and it will bring up a little HUD as you can see. So we can see that we have got 7 different inputs that we can choose from, some of which are more obvious than others, randomized probably being the most obvious, but the others are a little bit obscure if you're not too sure what you're looking at. We'll go through them one at a time though, and we'll have a look and see where they're useful. So we'll start off with split. That is our first option. And what split does is it will take in any stacks coming in from a farm and then it will split it down by the number of tunnels that you've got in sequence. So you'll notice that where these tunnels are all sitting side by side, they have got one border that runs right the way around the edge of them. And that is because these 4 are connected together. So any stack that comes through and comes into one of these tunnels is going to split down by 4. It's going to split into quarters. If there was only 2 tunnels, it would split down into just halves. So if we set this little farm off, we can see all of our cobble starts coming down. We'll be able to see that these big stacks are immediately going to split down into quarters. And this is a really easy way to break down what's coming in from a farm into evenly sized portions. So they're each going to go into these chests, and each one is going to fill up with exactly the same amount, assuming of course that the stack can be broken down into that number. If it's an odd number or anything like that, then there'll be 1 or 2 bits and pieces difference, but for the most part it will split it down as evenly as it possibly can. There we go, everything has gone in, and as we can see, each of our 4 chests at the end has got exactly the same amount of cobble in them, broken down nice and perfectly. One thing to note, if I just turn this farm around and I send it whizzing back in the opposite direction, they do not combine back together again at the end. It will just spit all of the items out if it doesn't have a belt to go onto. But that's only a very minor inconvenience. Pretty unlikely you're going to be turning your farm around anytime soon. Anyway, so that was the split one. What is our next option? Well, our next option, assuming we are going to skip over the forced split and the forced round robin, because we'll talk about them on the next contraption. The next one to take a look at here is going to be the round robin. And this isn't going to use all of the tunnels at the same time. Instead, if I just set this one back off again, what this is going to do is it's going to keep all of the cobble coming through in stacks, but instead of splitting it down, it's just going to make them go through each of the tunnels one at a time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Ultimately, it's going to achieve exactly the same thing as splitting the stacks would. We're still going to end up with all of the cobble that was down at the bottom being split into 4 even piles because we have 4 different tunnels that it's going through. It's just doing it in a slightly different way by taking it in turns rather than breaking down each of the stacks. And where this is particularly useful is it means that we've still got our cobble being broken down into 4 stacks, but there are gaps on the belt. So if you want to be able to add in other items to go in as well, it's not taking up the entirety of the belts the same as it would when it was splitting the stacks down. You've still got these nice little gaps, so you're able to add in other ingredients, other components, whatever it is you want to be sending through too. And next of our options, looking at our HUD, skipping over the forced round robin, next we have got the prefer nearest. And what this is going to do is it means that the input is going to always go out of the nearest tunnel which has got an available output. So what I've done just to demonstrate that one is I filled up this chest most of the way with oak planks and this one as well, and what we will see is the cobble is going to come through. It'll use this tunnel because it's the nearest with an output. It's going to go into the chest, and then once this gets filled up, it'll then move on to the next one. So we'll just send that one along. Go a little bit faster than that for us. Here comes our stacks. You can see it is using only the nearest available tunnel. These are all going into the chest, and once that chest filled up, it started to use the next nearest tunnel along. Once that one fills up, it used the next nearest tunnel along. So you can see this is just a way of filling up chests one after another rather than having them all filling up at the same time. And the last of our settings to take a look at on this contraption is going to be the randomize, which again is another one that it slightly does what it says on the can. And what it will do is instead of going in a round robin fashion where we go 1, 2, 3, 4, it's just going to randomize which ones of the tunnels each of those stacks is going to come out of. Again, it's not going to split the stacks down, it will just be working with full stacks. It just means you now can't predict which one of the tunnels it's going to be coming out of. It also doesn't split it down perfectly now. You won't find that you have exactly quarter in each of the chests, or exactly fifths, depending on how many tunnels you've got, of course. It does mean you'll have a slight variation because of this random factor. So as these ones are all coming through, let's have a little look at how well they have stacked up. There's not too many in there. Oh, there's much more in that one. Much more in that one. And somewhat of a middling amount in that one, I suppose. So as you can see, you can't predict exactly how many you're going to get in each of the chests. It just adds that random factor in there. But for now, let's leave off our basic cobble farm and come and have a look over here. So this little setup here is representing an iron farm. Here you have your typical iron farm output. You've got lots of iron nuggets coming through, and you've also got plenty of flint as well, which you may or may not see as a waste product. And when you've got that much iron coming through, you're probably going to want to be able to compress it down and store it much more compactly, which is what this setup is doing. So we've got one little basin here, which has got a press above it, which is going to crush down iron nuggets into ingots. And then we've got 2 set up one after another, which will crush iron nuggets into ingots and then the ingots into the blocks. So it's just a way of getting the 3 different types of iron from one farm. And we've also got one belt at the front, which has been set up to just let the nuggets go through. And we've got this one on the far side, which is just letting all of the flint go through so that we're not getting any backup within the farm. And this is where the different settings for the inputs on the top really become very useful when you're working with this type of setup. And if we set this farm off, so we're going to be using split, the first of those options that we have, we'll see that all of the stacks are going to get split up, and it'll come through, but it's perhaps not going to do quite what we wanted it to. So we'll speed this one up a little bit, and we can see our stacks are being broken down. All of our flint is going through at the far side into that waste chest, but we've got a bit of an issue here. There is a backlog in those two belts over there, because these presses aren't working fast enough, and so an awful lot of these nuggets are just shooting past. They're just going straight into the chest on the end. And after everything has gone through, we've ended up with the majority of the nuggets in this first chest. We've got a couple of ingots, and we've only achieved one iron block out of all of that. The flint went through just fine because that doesn't need to pass through any components. And so what we'll do though, is we'll set this farm off again, but this time we will use forced split. And what that's going to mean is that as these stacks come in, if they can't be broken down because one of the outputs is full, then this won't work. It will just hold on to the stacks inside of the tunnels. So if we set that off, and we'll go a little bit faster than that, we'll see it'll just be able to break down the stacks as per usual to begin with. They're able to just travel through. Oh, but that one is now full. And so what it's going to do is each time a belt gets full, it waits until there is space, holding the stacks on the other side. This just means that these presses are going to be able to be working as fast as they're capable of without all of the nuggets just whizzing past on this side. And once everything has gone through, the result of that is we've got far fewer nuggets, we've got more ingots, and this time we have in fact got 3 blocks of iron. And of course all of the flint just went straight through because that's not having to go through any components as before, so an entire stack is just going through each time. And so what you can see though is that just by having that little bit of extra control, by having that forced aspect, it means we can make these farms more efficient by not letting items just bypass straight through them. And the same goes for round robin. That works in exactly the same way as well. In the forced round robin, if you've got one of your outputs which is full, nothing is going to bypass. It is going to make sure that it waits until there is space, and then it will continue on with its cycle. Again, achieving much the same results, but just doing so in a slightly different way. And that brings us on to the last of our inputs. So if we open up our HUD one more time, we can see the last one on the list is synchronized inputs. And what that's going to do is it means that these tunnels will not output their filtered item until they have got something to output in every single one of the tunnels. So as you can see, I've got them set up at the moment to put out emeralds, lapis and diamonds. And over here in these chests, I've got a healthy supply of emeralds, lapis. I don't seem to have any diamonds. So what's going to happen though is when I set this off, we will see that our items are going to come out, but they're going to get into these tunnels and then it will just stop. It's not going to be able to output anything until it receives a diamond on the end. You can see everything is just sitting and waiting, and then when we give it the diamond that it's waiting for, we just throw one onto the belt, we will see that it will be able to have an output. And there we go, here they come, and then once again it has stopped because it's got no diamonds. And so this way you can control very easily the output coming from chests if you want to make sure that every ingredient is ready for a component that you're doing, for example. Now, one thing to note about this synchronized inputs is that it is a little bit picky about how it's going to be able to receive these items. If we just stop this for now and we take everything back, and we take the ones out from in there as well, which you can do just by right-clicking on tunnels and you'll take whatever's inside them out, and we can place them over here, and what we'll do is we'll get rid of these 2 funnels on that side, and what we'll do is we'll pop everything in here instead. So we'll give it an emerald, a lapis and a diamond, which you would think it would be perfectly happy with. Then if we set the farm off, everything is going to come out nicely. There's our emerald, there's our lapis, there's our diamond, and nope, they got stuck. And that is because these tunnels might be connected to each other, but they're not able to pass items between each other. So despite the fact that we've got all of the components there, it's still not going to work, because the emerald had to come in on this side, then the lapis, and then the diamond, depending on how you've got your filter set up. That's why you need 3 inputs coming from the very front. But that is just something you just need to be aware of. With this one of the inputs, it's only the synchronized input where you need to have each of your tunnels having its own input in order for it to work. Otherwise, it just won't, and that is just the way that these ones happen to work. So though, this is all about brass tunnels. What about the andesite ones? Well, sadly, they are nowhere nearly as useful, I'm afraid. If we take an example of this little andesite tunnel here, we'll take it over to our cobble farm on the other side. If I then knock out all of these, and I replace them with nice andesite tunnels, which are very much cheaper to make and don't use the brass, we immediately see that there is a problem, which is that they are not connected together. They don't have that one border that runs neatly around the sides, and that's because they can't talk to each other, unfortunately. And so when I set this farm off, what we'll find is that we have no way of changing any filter slots, we have no way of changing any of the inputs along the top, and instead all of the items are just going to pass straight through. They also don't talk to any of the belts alongside themselves like this if they're in a horizontal and going in the same direction. And in general, the andesite tunnels just aren't really as useful as the brass ones. They do have one very good function, well, I suppose technically two. For one thing, they can be used to decorate your belts. They do have a lovely little side slot where you can see the items passing through, which is very pleasing if you're making quite an industrial look to them. But one thing that they can do, I'll just bounce my way back over here, is they can't talk to any of the belts going in parallel, but they can talk to belts going perpendicular to themselves. So in here, I've got the random outputs of a tree farm, and if I allow this farm to start off, what we'll see is that entire stacks pass through, but one little item is being taken away on either side of the stacks as they come through. The vast majority of them are going in that direction, but one single item has been ferried away from each stack. On both sides, just as you can see. And so, if you are in a situation where you've got a lot of stacks passing through and you just want to take one away every now and again, then this andesite tunnel is perfectly capable of doing that for you. One thing you can't do with these though is add on a filter slot, so you can't say, well, I only wanted you to take the apple, I only wanted you to take a stick, I didn't want everything else. That's a kind of tough luck with these ones, you'd have to use the brass for that. And in fact, even in this situation, brass tunnels are very much more useful, not only because they have that filter slot on the side, but because you can, once again, use its functionality up at the top, so you can split down stacks as well. Poor old andesite tunnels, they're just not very useful in this instance. What we do though, if we pop that one back, we can see that it's on split at the moment, and so it's splitting down the stacks into thirds. We're going to end up with 1/3 going that way, 1/3 going that way, and 1/3 going that way of each of those stacks as they came through. And of course you also have all of the other functionality of the brass tunnels that we've talked about. Oh, and they can also be used to decorate as well. Do you know what? The brass ones are, fortunately, just a lot more useful than the andesite ones. But that does very much depend, of course, on what you want to do with your farm. If one little item being filtered off is what you're after, then stick with the andesite ones. But generally speaking, I only really start using these once I'm into brass. Anywho though, I hope you've enjoyed this little video where we've taken a bit of an in-depth look at some of the brass tunnels just to see the sorts of things that they can be used for. Happy Minecrafting everyone, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye!